Hello, whiskey fans. Welcome to another Whisky Waffle. My name is Ingrid Anna Jones, and today's question is, what is Scotch? So you may have seen on films people walking into bars and they'll say, I'll have a Scotch, please. Or they might say, Scotch on the rocks, if they're trying to be really cool. But if you do that and if you go and order that, what would you get? Or what are you likely to get? And what does it mean? So I thought we'd have a little look at that. But just before we kick off, it'd be great if you could subscribe. It's totally free. Here's how to do it and where to do it. And just below there is also the comment field. If you've not found that yet, then do leave me any comments, or if you have any topics you'd like me to cover, put them into the comments below and I can pick them up then. That would be great. So back to Scotch. So Scotch as a word is often used to relate to various things from Scotland. You can get different things such as beef, you can get Scotch beef. When it is referred to whiskey, Scotch whiskey, often actually they drop the whiskey and they just call it Scotch. But there is a saying that goes, every Scotch is a whiskey, but not every whiskey is Scotch. And that's because Scotch whiskey is governed by a particular set of criteria that has been laid down in law. Now, these laws have been around for a while. There's been Whisky Acts and other things, but the most recent one, and the one that is now in place, are the Scottish Whisky Regulations, and they were brought out on the 23rd of November 2009, so quite recent in some ways. And that basically, those regulations cover all sorts of different things regarding Scotch whisky, or regarding the whisky. Everything from where it's made, how it's made, what it's matured in. So it has to be matured in oak barrels, has to be made in Scotland, has to be made of malted barley and water, to which you can add other whole grains, but they have to be fermented with an endogenous enzyme, a yeast, and distilled to a particular percentage, so less than 94.8%, which sounds very high, but certain other drinks such as vodka can actually go above that, and it has to have nothing added. And that's quite an interesting one, because they actually say nothing can be added, but they do allow you to add, it's a colouring, and it's called E150A. Now, they don't often tell you about this colourant, but it's a caramel colourant, so it's more about the colour. And apparently it doesn't give any taste. Now, I'm sure between you and I, maybe we wouldn't know, but there could be people out there, and there may be, who actually claim that's not true. The interesting part is that if you go over to America, bourbon also has a huge set of regulations that are laid down there too, but they say you cannot add anything, and they won't even allow the addition of the colorant. So it's something particular to Scotch that you can have that in. It also has to be, once it's bottled, it has to be 40% ABV or higher. So there are a few of the regulations that basically are about a Scotch. Now, the interesting thing is that Scotch can be single malt, or it can be a blended whiskey. From that point of view, it doesn't discriminate. And there's actually 5 types of whiskey that are all Scotch, but they are different. So firstly, you've got the single malt. Now, a lot of people will say to me, oh, single malt, that's what I drink, a single malt. That means that the whiskey has been distilled and created at a single distillery. Obviously then with all the Scotch rules, so that distillery is in Scotland, and what it uses and how it's made. But the key is it's one distillery. So the single refers to the distillery. So then you have single grain. So the malt obviously is malted barley. Grain can be anything else. They generally will have malted barley in there as well, but they will use perhaps, they might do a rye whiskey, for example. But it's still a Scotch as long as it follows all the other guidelines and criteria. So that would be a single grain. But then it gets interesting, because then you can get a blended malt, a blended grain, and a blended. So that's the 5: single malt, single grain, blended malt, blended grain, and blended whiskey. Now, when it comes to the difference between blended and single, like I say, single is one distillery. So all blended means is that it has been that whiskey has been created using whiskey from other distilleries. So a blended malt actually uses single malt. There's just single malts in there, but they're from other distilleries. Usually, and if it's a Scotch, then it will be within Scotland. So you could have a Scotch that's a blend, and it's a premium blend, as they might say. A blended malt might be a premium blended grain. Still can be aged, still can follow other things that we'd like to see. It will always be oak barrels that they mature in. But yes, that is also Scotch. And then down to blended. Blended means it's grain and malt. So the only time you would get the malted barley and other grains mixed would be in a blend. But again, it's not really about the whiskey per se, it's about the distillery. So for most of those, it's specific to either one distillery or more than one distillery. And then at the end, the blend is also then particular. It has the addition of different grains within there. But they are all Scotch. So Scotch has actually got quite a wide repertoire, if you like. So there are many, many, many whiskies that are Scotch. The other key thing is that it is matured for at least 3 years. It used to be 3 years and a day, I think, to make sure that they maximise those 3 years, but it seems to now suggest that it is just 3 years. So 3 years, but it has to mature for 3 years. Again, bourbon is actually 2 years, so there are differences in making of whiskey drink. But yeah, 3 years. 3 years in an oak cask in an excise warehouse or a dunnage. And that's basically just a place where the government, the tax rules are, so they're not paying tax on it while it's sitting there for 10 years, because I think it breaks everybody's bank. So yes. So there you go. So we have Scotch whiskey and what it means and what you can guarantee you're getting when you ask for a Scotch. Now, there's no saying when you ask for that Scotch whether you're going to get a single malt or a blend, or so you might think you're cool walking into a bar and asking for Scotch. But if you want to guarantee the kind of whiskey you get, you might be better asking for a particular whiskey. Or what I do is I suss out every bar I go into first, especially if I've not been there before. I check out what whiskies are there and I ask for it by name. It is quite funny sometimes, because often I'll ask for one that the bartender doesn't know, and then they're like faffing around trying to find the one, and I'm trying to direct them amongst the bottles to the one I want. But yeah. So it's always fun. There's a lot out there to choose. So yes, so that good popular saying, every Scotch is a whiskey, but not every whiskey is Scotch. Till next time, cheers then, bye.